Please welcome Jane Ray, Michael Palin and Michael Parkinson.
I'm scared to take my mask off because it smudged my lippy and it looks like I've snogged everyone in the room, which, given the enormity of the occasion today, is, I hope, understandable. Apologies.
I had the same trouble. I'd like to start off with the Michael at the end first, if I may. Michael, in that short clip we saw, you say that you got into broadcasting and broadcast journalism because of Alan Whicker. Could you just tell us a little about that journey?
Well, he was a hero figure. And when I made the transition from print press, Fleet Street and whatever, into television, I was looking for people who might help me along. And I soon became aware of the fact that Alan Whicker was the best at what he did. And what he did was what I wanted to do. And I spent the rest of my life trying to be like him and failing. But the fact is that he was wonderful at his job. If you watched him closely as a journalist and understood what he did, you learned everything that you needed to know about interviewing people. There's kind of mythology about interviewing, that there's some kind of spell you cast. The only spell you cast is if you actually give the impression to the person you're talking to that you know who he is. And they're so flattered by that that they're fair game. It's not as simple as that, of course. I mean, he was a wonderful, he was a dramatic interviewer in the sense that he had a real sense of theatre and of stage. And that was also very much a part of Alan's creating this image around himself. And I just learned so much from him. And then when I became a friend of his, I mean, that was even better, because that's really all we talked about was you know, the interviews that we tried to do, the interviews we did do, the ones we thought were awful, and the ones that we thought might have succeeded. So he was this important part of my life, and in fact still is. I mean, you learn from masters, and you never forget what they tell you.
And did you think that the fact that he came from the world of journalism, is that what made him different as an interviewer, do you think?
Well, I've always assumed that it was, to be doing an interview, you've got to be able to ask a question. And it's a theory that's not been disproved by anything I've seen on television at all lately. That's just my point of view. I would have hated to have tried to interview some of the people I interviewed without understanding quite, after years of practice, how to go about it. What Alan was very sort of deceptive. I mean, he was all the things you said he was quietly mannered, he was persuasive and all that. But he was a hell of a tough journalist too. He really was. And he never shirked the difficult question. And what you'll discover, I did discover watching him, is that you can ask somebody anything you want, absolutely anything, providing they believe that you are sincere in asking them a question, that you're not some fibbity gibbet who's going to go away and badmouth you or whatever it might be. So that was terribly important. And you watch some interviews nowadays, and you can almost feel the kind of tension in the air because you know that they're trying to get a question to an answer, or to answer a question rather, that they're finding too difficult to frame even if they thought about it in the first place. Research, again, I mean, that's what he taught me. You don't just walk into a situation unarmed. You actually do all the research that's necessary. So if necessary, you could write a book about it, at least a long article. You must know that before you go in, and you must try to actually assume. I mean, his attitude toward difficult people, you saw it with Papa Doc. It was a line in Papa Doc too, I remember that, where he said to him, "Oh, they tell me you actually torture people." What? What a question. Yeah. I mean, dare do that, you know. But he did it. And it was the way he did it which actually got a response, which wasn't, kill this man. Yeah. Yeah. So all those things. I mean, that's what makes it fascinating. And that's what I found in my fascinating friend.
So did you learn from that technique when you had to interview tricky customers?
Yes. I mean, I never interviewed anybody like Papa Doc, thank the Lord. But Muhammad Ali was a handful from time to time. And there have been others too, either an excess of drink or whatever it might be, have proved difficult. But that took me back to my days in pubs in Barnsley, you know. I was quite adept at that. Yeah, I mean, the wonderful thing about interviewing is that it's a very complex thing to do. But at the heart, it's hard. It's an easy thing to do. But you have to do the work. You have to do the preparation. It's no good reading 3 cuttings and thinking, I know about this person. You've got to read everything and then very carefully work out a map, a route to the kind of interview you want to do. And that's the fascination of the job. And he was brilliant at it. I mean, you know, and he was also, I mean, there wasn't a weakness in Alan at all. I mean, those wonderful bits he did to camera. I mean, try and walk in and talking like he did. It is not easy, let me tell you. And a couple of examples I can think of, Alan doing extraordinarily long pieces to camera, never faltering, never breaking the rhythm of the article, of the piece he was delivering. Magical, extraordinary. You watch that and think, I can't do that. You know? But you have to if you want to be like Alan Whicker.
Jane, you worked with Alan a lot, and I was just wondering how you first encountered him and how did you find him?
Well, interestingly, the first time we worked together, I nearly didn't find him because the taxi said, "Oh, I know where Alan lives." I met the taxi driver at the airport. "I'll take you there." And we drove and we drove and we went down country roads in Jersey and we twisted and turned, and he deposited me at this enormous pile, this huge kind of hacienda-style house. He said, "This is where all the coach parties come." And I thought, this does not look right at all. So I surreptitiously phoned Valerie. She said, "Oh, no, darling, just keep going round the road." It's Alan rather enjoyed the fact that everybody assumed he lived in this massive hacienda-style house. So that is how I found him and Valerie opening the door and inviting me in, and Alan just saying, "Champagne, my dear." And it was a good champagne. So what I learned from that was, as you pass through the airport on your way, you've got your little pint of milk, and you're drinking your milk because you don't want to go too silly too early when you're working with Alan. He was a fantastic man to work with, and along with Valerie, I think it's fair to say I miss him on a daily basis, because you don't meet a maverick mind like that, a man in disguise as your proper English gent, but with a razor sharp mind for understanding the whole paradox of being human. He was an extraordinary person to work with. I was so lucky.
And the near Michael. Michael, obviously, in many ways you became a world traveller like Alan, and he made it look so effortless from the point of view of when you see the programmes, you don't think about what the massive logistics that must have gone in to make that programme work. He was away for months at a time sometimes, and he had to be at the right place and meet the right people with the right transport and the right permissions. Now, you've had experience of that. How difficult is it?
Well, you've just got to have a very good and preferably small production team. You don't want long lines of communication. We were very lucky in the programmes I did for the BBC that we were allowed basically to go out, and we were trusted to get the programmes together. We had about 3 people in the office in London. 6 of us went out together. So there wasn't a lot of people involved, but they had to be absolutely committed, and they had to be able to work as hard as they could to get us to the right place at the right moment. It must be an endless amount of work on phones when, ships didn't appear at certain times, or the railway wasn't running, or someone had just got shot, or whatever, They had to have this sort of ability to a few people to control a very, very rapidly changing situation. But you see, I mean, I'm just pick you up because you said I've travelled like Alan. Of course, I travel unlike Alan. And I was, when I started doing Around the World in 80 Days, I felt that I was, the shadow of Alan Whicker was there behind me. He was the great international traveller. He was, as has been said, the most brilliant sort of professional, precise work that I couldn't ever emulate. So when I started off on Around the World in 80 Days, I thought, how do I get out of the shadow of this man who did it this particular way? And straight away I realised that I wasn't any good at interviews with famous people. I was just hopeless. I don't know why. I just wasn't terribly interested. I wanted to get on to the next place. And so in the end, the third episode of Around the World in 80 Days, we were on the Dow, and there was nowhere to sleep apart from on the deck. We were entirely dependent on these fishermen from Gujarat to take us to Bombay. There was nothing much more we could do except sort of talk to them and make a program out of it. And by the time we finished that, I realized the best thing is just be yourself. Don't try and be anybody else, or don't try and avoid being anybody else. Just be yourself. And after that, I felt a little more comfortable. But not until we got back and the program was seen as very successful did I think that we'd actually pulled it off. And I had got out of the shadow of Alan, who just was the most brilliant television sort of presence. And it's been said about his pieces to camera. Really, I know, having been asked to do a few of those, how skillful he was, and he had an epigrammic wit in it. It wasn't just sort of, I am here doing this, doing that. There's always a little bit here and a little kind of thing there, and he made memorable phrases. He was a great phrase maker, whilst giving you the information so well. So I'm quite glad that in the end, my sort of messy way of travelling allowed me to sort of be distanced from the paragon of presenting that Alan was.
Alan is on record as saying that it was the people he met that sparked his interest rather than the places he went. But I would say it was a mixture of the two, because the visuals were fantastic. And he's also on record as saying that he thinks his time in the army is what gave him the ability to talk to people from all different social strata. And we've got a clip from Whicker's War now, which just explains a little about how Alan got to be the man he was. So could we have the next clip reel, please?
Whicker's War started prosaically in the back of a black cab from St Pancras to the Army Transit Camp, then the Hotel Great Central in Marylebone, where at reception I asked for the Army Film and Photo Unit, AFPU. The corporal clerk checked his list. Army Field Punishment Unit, sir, he said. No, I said, at least I hope not. So the first of my millions of travel miles around Whicker's world were clocked up in wartime London, taking a cab into the unknown and wondering what the hell was about to hit me. I found myself happily out of the infantry, yet into far more battles, assault landings, shot and shell and invasions than I'd expected. Yet I survived. It must have been beginner's luck. Whicker's luck, you might say. By today's standards, our camera equipment was pathetic. Any weekend enthusiast would be scornful. Each stills photographer was issued with a Super Iconta, a Zeiss Icon with 80mm lens, yellow filter and lens hood. No telephoto lens. They saw the war through that little aperture. A German tank had to be close and centre frame before the cameraman could take a reasonable shot, by which time the tank might take one too, rather more forcibly. So, ill-equipped, but optimistic, we went to war. I missed most of the fun and games and the dangers of Naples, because in that bleak winter, the 8th Army was being decimated not by Germans, but by jaundice. This spread through all ranks and did far more damage than high explosives. First, it made you feel like death while you still looked fine. Then you turned bright yellow and felt fine while looking like death. It was an unpleasant plague. I was carried by ambulance many uncomfortable miles from the snow-covered mountains of central Italy back to Bari. Then I experienced my very first flight. It wasn't very stylish. I was on a stretcher in a Red Cross Dakota that flew back to Catania in Sicily, then on to Tunisia. There, at the end of this international journey, an ambulance train took me across the border to Constantine Hospital. Strange that the first of the many millions of airborne miles I was to cover around Whicker's world should have been endured flat on my back. Now, of course, you pay extra to travel like that.
Then it was back to reporting for Fleet Street before ending up at the front line again, this time in the Far East. Back from Korea, TV beckoned, and Fleet Street's loss was the viewing public's gain.
This is the village of Branch End in Northumberland, on the road between Hexham and Gateshead. And this is...
Wicker's early travels took him the length and breadth of the country.
10 houses, and we're looking for number 5, which is perhaps a little more difficult, you might think. That's number 1, and this is number 2, and this is number 8, and number 8.
That's one of the best things he ever did. That thing walking through the village, as an example of memory and presentation, it was quite extraordinary. I mean, I remember seeing that thing. I could never ever even try to do that. You know, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Can I make one other point too that he made about the war? I came into television in '61, '62, and I joined Granada, and that was run by a veteran and a lot of guys who'd been in the army, just like Alan. Dennis Foreman himself had been a major in the army. And they were great bosses. They knew how to handle people. They'd been under fire. They'd done the same in dire circumstances. And I think my generation was particularly lucky to be governed by them. When I went to go to the BBC, it was Paul Fox and other people like that, who were, you know, very, very good, intelligent bosses. But more than that, they had a kind of a side to them that I would never actually quite understand, but appreciate nonetheless because it made them what they were. And I think they had a very big impact on television at that time. They built the best television of all. Don't ask me what happened to it. I don't know. But we could debate that as an extra issue. But certainly they were the men, Attenborough, people like that, who it was an absolute delight to work with. It really was. They were inspiring.
It was interesting that, I mean, television really come of age after ITV came along in '55. And although the entertainment wings of ITV were run by great entrepreneurs like Lou Grade and the Black Brothers and stuff like that, much of the running of the everyday stuff were ex-military men who came along. And it was the same at the BBC. It must have been the same when you started. There was still that sort of hangover.
Yeah,
people like Dennis Mayne Wilson and people like that, you know.
Yeah. In every department, in the drama department as well. So I can't remember what his name was, but he was a naval officer. It was just brilliant. Produced these amazing and wonderful plays. And I think it also shows in the confidence in which you see Whicker, Alan, sorry, I shouldn't keep calling me Whicker, Alan, doing his stuff. There's a confidence there, and I think that must come from knowing that he's very clear where his position is in the world and what he's got to do, and the military background must have helped in that way. So it's not a question of how do I do this, oh dear, you know, and maybe it was like that, but he seems to project confidence, which I always thought was rather admirable and important.
The point
asset.
too, I mean, was that he was inventing it as he went along. Nobody else had done that before him.
No.
I mean, we'll look at it now and think we'll learn from him, but who did he learn from? There was no example. So the genius about him was that he created for all of us a system of presenting the camera that's still with us to this day. Not too often nowadays, actually.
I think
to
he
please
was
me, that's for sure. But
Yeah.
you know that's the extraordinary thing about him. There was nobody to learn from at all. He did it himself.
David Attenborough was doing it with animals.
Exactly.
You know,
But
I'd say he was the other
yes,
figure.
but that was later.
An incredibly important figure when I was watching television first. That I took seriously, in the same way I took Whicker and his world seriously. I took David's world seriously because he had a believability, a conviction, and a confidence without talking down to you, without sort of barking out orders. Just he knew the subject, and he brought you into it, and you felt I'm in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that that army experience as well must have helped when he was planning the shows, because sometimes you need military precision, don't you, to get to where you're going.
Yes.
And
I think it taught him to be fast and accurate, because as he describes, he had no telephoto lens. He had to rush into the action, get the shot, get the story, and rush out again. But what I think also honed his skills was the years, as Valerie told me very movingly, because his father died early of heart disease when he was only in his 20s, and he was a military man too. there were periods where Alan, as a child, was told to be quiet, Daddy's not well. And I think this, he said later, made him a writer because he was an observer first. So by the time he was given this new toy to play with, which was television, he was ready to go. And let's not forget, he got picked out for television because Alistair Milne worked with Alan in radio. And Alan was writing fiction stories for the radio and thought that Alan had a flair and pulled him out to play with this whole new box of toys, which was the early days of television. And I saw this morning. I thought Michael would like this because it came from the Sheffield Star. The other thing that Alan was very good at doing, from the word go, this is the Sheffield Star review of the Alan Whicker's inserts to the Tonight programme, 1958, and his first tour around the world. Mr. Whicker's style book ought to be handed to the Panorama team, which is weightily informative but never stimulating.
Sheffield wisdom.
Yes, they got it right, because there was this,
Yeah.
Panorama was doing proper journalism and Alan was creating something new, which was entertaining, stimulating, and made people
What was
laugh.
interesting about Alan was if he had a failure, it was that they tried to get him to do a talk show.
Yes.
In the studio.
Whicker,
And
1986.
Exactly, and
with
they
an accent.
made the terrible mistake of putting up a huge table between Alan and the guest.
Very true.
So there were about 13 rows down there. And there was a hello, how are you? I mean, it didn't work at all. That was the only, I think, they discord in that wonderful career.
But if you put him next to somebody peeling potatoes in some far-flung corner of
Then
Australia, perfect.
Exactly.
Beautiful
That's it,
television.
Yeah.
I mean, in that clip there, we get onto the Tonight programme, which was a very important programme in Alan's career. But it was also quite a groundbreaking programme in itself, the way that it was presented. And it was sort of unlike any of the shows it was on at the time. And I think because perhaps of Ned Sherrin's involvement, it did have sometimes its tongue-in-cheek, didn't it? And I think that suited... Alan had a mischievous streak in him. And I was wondering if you could talk a little about that, Michael, about Alan's mischievous side.
Well, also, too, with that programme, what was wonderful about it was the cast. It wasn't just Alan. It was
Life Roberts,
wonderful.
Others,
We were talking about, what's his name? The guy with the bad leg. Kenneth Alsop.
Yeah.
I mean, the most glamorous man I ever saw. He used to wear a black cloak. My wife fell madly in love with him. Most women did, with or without the black cloak. But there was him, there was Derek Hart, there was an entire assembly of people who somehow interlocked and formed a programme. There's been nothing like it since at all. There really hasn't. It was a groundbreaker, wonderful. I used to watch that with great interest because, again, you learn so much from those people. They were wonderful. Very, very good journalists. Phil Pott, you go on and on and on. Yeah. I worked with a wonderful Cockney cameraman. Called, what was his name, Mike? I'm asking Michael's my memory nowadays. What? No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Who was the eccentric man to a huge degree. I mean, we would celebrate everything covering a war in Israel. And we decided we'd have a good drink up afterwards. And we went to this very posh restaurant. And he ordered, as his meal, to celebrate the success of our tour, ham, egg and chips. Now, Slim Hewitt. That was his name, Slim Hewitt.
Yeah.
Wonderful character. I don't know why I said that, because I'm very mad. But the thing about that programme was that it opened the way to so many careers and it had an unfailing standard of excellence for many, many years. And look at the producers of it, you don't have to wonder why.
I think your point about the humour and the mischief is well made, because that's very, really important in making a connection with your audience, however serious the subject is. And Alan, I discovered that fairly early on when we were doing Around the World in 80 Days, and one of our directors, Roger Mills, said, well, we'll go and interview Alan, because he's the master of this. And we went up to the Dorchester, to his penthouse suite in the Dorchester. So I already felt about that high. Then I think probably champagne was taken. I'm not quite sure. So I asked him a few things about what advice can you give me when things go wrong? And he always said, always be always be terribly British. Don't try and speak their language. You'll never be any good. Always speak in English. So I said, that's fine. Right, yeah. And I said, well, like the crew. I'm going with the crew. We're going to spend 80 days together. What about that, And he said, I'll tell you one thing about crew. Never, ever have dinner with the crew. So, then I took it very seriously. I thought, I'm a pleasant man he is. And I realised later he was completely sending me up.
Yes.
Oh, yes, and the last thing he said, I'm going to give you a card here. And this has got the address of a company that will airlift you out of any situation anywhere in the world at any moment. Because he thought 80 days was a daft idea, although he'd been the first person who was asked to do it, of course. At the time. Yeah.
A singular man.
Singular man, yeah.
So we saw a bit there of Whicker's War. Now, that was something that was particularly close to his heart, wasn't it, Jane?
Mm.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very grateful to Valerie Kleeman, who persuaded him to do that journey from the tip of Sicily right up to Rome, to explore such a formative and dangerous part of his life. Until that point, Alan would say breezily, he said it to you, didn't he, Michael, about, the best view of me is the back of my head, nobody wants to see me talking about my feelings to camera and all of that. But you could see in Whicker's War, he was finding a very deep voice of anger at the way aspects of the war had been handled, particularly the role of General Mark Clark, who he felt had led to many, many more deaths because of his vainglorious attempts to have a photo opportunity capturing Rome. And there is this moment in the film that I find incredibly moving, where Alan is describing this to camera, and he just, because he was barely out of his teens himself at the time, and he lost close friends and comrades, and he just does this with his hands and moves away, and it speaks absolute volumes. I wish he'd lived longer and we could have heard about his experience of the Korean War, because that's another fascinating period of Alan's life where he actually went missing, presumed dead, and read his own obituary. That was... But you're right in what you've both said, all three of you have said, in terms of Alan not being afraid to make himself ridiculous. And one of the cue cards, one of the cards that came up in connection with interviewing Sean Connery, it said, prepared to look ridiculous, ideas. And the ideas did seem to involve sports cars like me and an Aston Martin and things like that. So he was always playful with the medium and didn't mind making himself the butt of a joke if it was going to hold his audience and to take them through to the next difficult and awkward idea.
I think there was little moments of perception. I remember seeing something recently about doing a bit about bullfighting. And he was making the point about the British attitude to bullfighting being different from the Spanish attitude. And he said the British identify with the bull. The Spanish identify with the courage of the man who's fighting the bull. I thought that's Hemingway wrote thousands of books on bullfighting and never got it quite so
in one sentence.
So spot on as that.
And when he did his programme about fox hunting was called Death in the Morning, because of course Hemingway wrote the book Death in the Afternoon. But Matador, I think, is a masterpiece, but it's still today, more than 50 years on, so deeply uncomfortable that it we can't show it. I think we've got a clip later where we're focused on the audience.
I think once again, it comes back to that journalistic idea that, when you were a print journalist, you were told, to ask when, what, where, how, And I think he had a succinct way of putting his questions so he could cut to the chase very quickly. And I think that did come of that.
Yeah, there was no clutter, really.
No.
Felt he knew where to go. I also think a thing that should be said about him was that he was always immaculate. I mean, he always wore a suit, usually either a cravat or a tie. His hair was immaculately brushed, his spectacles well chosen. I mean, he just looked superb all the time. And that's a quite important thing, I think, if you're doing television work. If you start putting on lots of different outfits, people kind of go off the ball and they get a little bit confused. with Whicker, he was always Whicker. You knew what Alan looked like, and you felt reassured. Ah, yes, that's how to dress. That's how to dress when you go around the world. Unfortunately, I didn't inherit that at all.
We're going to have another clip reel now, but as I told you at the start, because of COVID restrictions, we've got to change the panel because we can't have people on at the same time. And before Sir Michael Parkinson leaves us...
You're getting rid of me? Yeah. How dare you?
I just wanted to ask, Michael, whether you thought there was a place for Whicker in today's television, or have those days gone?
Please God, let there be. No, it's changed radically. I would ask you simply to look at what is replaced tonight. That's your answer. It's not there anymore. And that style of magazine program done by fine journalists who mastered a new craft, broadcasting, is gone, sadly. And it's a great loss, I think. And it leads to all kinds of situations that are against people understanding or wanting to be interviewers, I suppose. You know, you've got to have heroes. And who are the heroes today? I mean, Michael's an actor and a comedian and all that sort of thing, and he has a perception of travel as well, which is well worth. But it's built on Michael's skill, and it's built on the reputation he has as an actor and as a funny man. What we need, actually, apart from that, as well as that, is the Whicker figure who just comes through journalism, who's famous just for that, just for being a damn good journalist. And you try to find me now on television, looking over all television now, who they are. There are one or two around, but not too many. And there's certainly no magazine show that carries the same impact as the Tonight Show used to do. But, I mean, I will leave quietly. I will go home sobbing. But only because when you look back on your career, and I look back on mine now, it's been a long career, I look to people who inspired me, and Alan would be the man who inspired me most of all, and to whom I owe the biggest debt of all, because he taught me how to interview. Simple as that.
Well, thank you so much for your time in coming down here and saying these words.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Michael Parkinson.
And could we run the next clip reel, please? Thank you.
This is Britain, where those who describe themselves as fond of animals sometimes hunt them to death or spend their lives dominating a very small dog. Where fire brigades are called to rescue kittens from trees, people refuse to eat eggs laid by battery hens, get up petitions for horse troughs, and any book about a gull or a duck, however stumbling and inane, is an automatic bestseller. Old age pensioners go hungry, delinquents swing their bicycle chains, drunken parents cripple their children, but we're not really outraged until someone throws stones at a cat.
The majority of those who detest the very idea of bullfighting know little or nothing about it. Their reaction's natural and kind, for certainly there is cruelty, as there is, say, in abattoirs, in some circuses, in stag hunting or factory farming or fur trapping. It all depends whether you're most a friend of bull or man. The British who see a fight always identify with the bull. Spaniards, of course, have known all about this since childhood and naturally see themselves in the place of the man. Although some foreigners, like Mel Ferrer and Audrey Hepburn, like Orson Welles, have succumbed to this savage magic, few foreigners attend the important corridas in Madrid and Seville. For bullfighting does not, as some claim, depend upon tourist money.
The Kentucky Christian Leadership Conference, Southern Conference Educational Fund, West End Community Council, and Committee on Open Housing are hereby restrained and enjoined from any of the following acts.
The court's restraining orders read to demonstrators obligingly engaged upon a sit-down, while from the darkness, white hecklers throw bottles.
March, assembly, gathering, demonstration, or meeting is limited to such numbers as will not obstruct vehicle or pedestrian in an unreasonable manner. I urge you to get back in your trucks and return. You have been served with this. It has been read to you. Your presence here constitutes further contempt of the court.
The Reverend Lesser, a local Methodist, the Reverend King, Baptist and brother of Martin Luther King, and other sit-down leaders are arrested for contempt of court. They're fined $30 and jailed for 30 hours. A mini-martyrdom that unites their followers, earns nationwide publicity for their cause, and, even from whites, a certain sympathy. So, outside City Hall, open housing supporters, most of them white citizens and clergy, go down on their knees for a pray-in.
So, I mean, I've never fallen in love with the people that conventionally I should have fallen in love with.
You see, it wasn't the sex change that surprised Charleston. No, it was marrying a black man.
It was marrying a black man because the sex change was so well described in the London Daily Telegraph, and you know they are so pro-British there. I mean, the fact was that my natural mother's brother had kicked her in the stomach before I was coming. We have this great history of twins. I should have been twins. And when I was born, the midwife didn't know if it was a little boy or a little girl. And in England, the law was you automatically register the child as a little boy with dire results.
Now, for how many years did you live as a man?
Well, for 30 or more years.
Really?
I have a BB rifle here with no sights on it. I would like to show you what the impact of the bullet would be on some cans.
Almost everyone here totes a gun, and if you're keen to stay alive, you too can be taught to shoot straight. It's worth bearing in mind that in America somebody is killed or injured by gunfire every 2 minutes. And each year some 10,000 murders are believed to go undetected.
Pull trigger.
The American gun lobby is strongest in Texas, where bumper stickers warn, if guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns.
Sure you got bullets in them?
Many respectable Houstonians would sooner leave home without their trousers than their revolvers. They'd feel unbearably vulnerable in a land where it's always been natural for a man to go for his gun to defend himself the best he can.
Pull trigger. All right, now we're going to go back down the line. Same thing. Look right at the bottom of the can. Extend yourself over. Look at the bottom. Attaboy. Okay, you got another can. Right there. One more can. Look right there. Hey, how about that? That's all right down the line.
I did it!
You're great.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage John Coleshaw. John, we just saw some clips there of a more serious side of Whicker, a more dangerous side perhaps, and you've just made a play where you play Alan Whicker, and that's about one of those serious moments in his life, really. Would you tell us a little about it and how it came about?
Well, yes, it was a real privilege and a joy to portray Alan in this radio drama to celebrate and mark his centenary. And it really gives you an insight into those early times of his career. And to research for it, what a real privilege and a joy. Just simply sit back and just watch his programmes, enjoy those documentaries. And what a treat. Usually when we're learning a character, you have to watch Michael Gove or Boris Johnson for a short time. And you want that to be over as quickly as possible. But to just sit back and watch Alan's wonderful documentaries. Very often I'd watch these on a Sunday evening, I'd pour a dram and just sit back and enjoy and just spend some time in his company. And I think it was the most enjoyable research for a project that I've ever had the privilege to do, really.
It's an extraordinary piece of work. Can you tell us, it's set in, I think it starts in 1958, doesn't it? And it's on The Tonight Show. But can you just tell us a little bit, without too many spoilers, about what it's about?
Well, it does start in that time of the 1950s, in Alan's early documentaries for The Tonight Show, where he's visiting Japan and Hawaii. And we are starting to see that style that's been talked about so much, that instinct for the good old-fashioned journalism, what's happening and why. that insight and that instinct to get after the story and to say to the audience, I will go to all these amazing places and track down all these amazing events, and you can come with me. We're not going to talk down to you here. You travel with us. And it changed the face of everything from thereafter. So we're looking into that time of the early stages of his career, how the team formed, Syl Moorhead and Freddie on sound, the way they became a unit and how they worked together, right through to the birth of Whicker's World. And we follow that arc and all of the dramas and all of the comradeship and the sense of team that came with that. And that's really what it's centering on.
It's called The Other Side of the World, and I think one of the most remarkable things about it is your performance as Alan. Not so much that you do sound like him, but so much that you can maintain it for 90 minutes. That just seemed to me like a tremendous skill. I just wondered, was that something, did you sweat a lot doing that?
I think, to be honest, I mean, I love doing a quick comedy sketch. That's lovely. But to really immerse into the narrative of a story for 90 minutes and to really just lock into them, into their character, you really get to know them. And it uses a different part of your brain than a comedy sketch on Dead Ringers, perhaps. And that's a real lovely thing, to lock on and stay there. You immerse, and it starts to feel comfortable. And once you're in, away you go, and you're sort of locked in there. And the beauty with Alan, of course, you've got that familiar to camera style where every syllable is absolutely beautiful and presented so perfectly in that journalistic way to tell the story. But also, we've got that... Thank you. But also what we have is those wonderful moments where it's so conversational, where he's having a word with the person and really just trying to tease out of them how they're feeling or what they're going to do next. And even in just relaxed conversation, so quintessential, such panache, such distinction, such warmth. And it was sometimes you have voices where you think, I might speak like this permanently. And, and I think I might.
Yes.
Had you done him before, as it were?
Do you know, I hadn't, really. I hadn't. I'd enjoyed watching all of the wonderful portrayals of Alan. I think every impressionist from Mike Yarwood onwards, that wonderful era, and of course the legendary Python sketch, which it's so charming that Alan loved that sketch himself so much.
He did.
I think actually it's probably a cue to run the clip first, if I may. Yeah. If we could have the next clip reel, please.
I was lucky enough to be offered Around the World in 80 Days when it was still on the drawing board.
Ah.
I thought it was going to be such an ego trip, I thought you have to be an actor to do it well.
Oh, I see.
Because you love talking to camera if you're an actor. I get away with my programs, and they've lasted for 45 years because I'm not seen very often. It's just the back of my head talking to other people, and other people are Whicker's World. And then, of course, the way life is, a year went by, and I'm going to do this program on 80 people who are going around the world in a private jet, and I'm going to be talking to them all the time, and they've paid a lot of money for their holiday, and do they want me talking to them every day? No, they don't. So I think, I better do a report myself. It feels like the first day at school, I'm the new boy, all these strange faces around. Who are going to be the friends? Who are going to be the bores, the bullies, the people who are always late, and the ones you like very much? And I start that, and I suddenly realise I'm doing exactly what I could have done on Around the World in 80 Days, which was an enormous success, and was done very well. And to think, there may even be, at this moment, people saying, my God, how can we avoid that awful man from television? Is that possible? I think that's possible, yes. It was so therapeutic to confess the problems that I was having to the camera, and the camera became a friend. So I should have done that before, there's no doubt about it, but there, I was late on the game. I've been impersonated or sent up rotten all my professional career, really.
Today, we look at a vanishing race, a problem people who are fast disappearing off the face of the earth.
If you're going to be sent up rotten, relax and enjoy it.
A race, who one might say, a losing, a winning battle.
I choose to regard it as flattering.
I live in a sunshine paradise, a Caribbean dream, where only reality is missing.
The most famous one, of course, is Monty Python.
For this is Whicker Island, an island inhabited entirely by ex-international interviewers in pursuit of the impossible dream.
Thought it was very funny, and then I wrote to John Cleese and the lot the next day and said how funny I thought it was and how clever. P.S. You will, of course, be hearing from my solicitors.
The whole problem of Whicker Island is here in a nutshell.
There are just too many Whicker.
And by the return of post, I got pictures of all of them on the beach, all signed, autographed, and a little note saying, here's some evidence for them.
The lightweight suits, the old school ties, the practiced voice of the seasoned campaigner.
Cannot hide the basic tragedy here.
There just aren't enough rich people left to interview.
We've heard Alan's side of the story. What's your side?
I think actually quite interesting point made there by Alan about 80 days and him being asked to do 80 days. He was the first person asked to do it, and indeed I was not even the second person, or the third, or the fourth. I came after Noel Edmonds. I was scraping the barrel when they got me. But Alan sort of reflects on it and said, I could have just been doing Around the World in 80 Days, but they were radically different because Alan's icon was the plane, the jet. Around the World in 80 Days, the one thing you couldn't travel on was a plane. That would have been breaking the rules. And so my sort of travelling in the end ended up in sort of sweaty Egyptian railway stations on trains in the middle of nowhere, and you know, boats that are burnt out in Saudi Arabia and all that sort of thing, because we had to follow beyond the surface of the globe. And that, I think, made my programmes, or our programmes, rather rougher but much more spontaneous. Whereas Alan likes a structure. He likes a structure, and you can see the way he presents it. But he was, you know, used the plane quite unashamedly to get around the world. We never ended up in places.
Everything but.
Yeah.
Can you remember making the sketch?
Yes. I watch it now, and it's so embarrassing because we're all doing it, walking away. There just aren't enough rich people in the world left to interview, and we all have to dodge down, and someone else to come along. It was terribly, badly done. We should have done a second take.
Badly because done
you see bits where sort of someone actually dodges down. But there we all were, just near Great Yarmouth. Probably slightly nearer,
wasn't the Caribbean.
Slightly nearer Galston, but the Great Yarmouth Way. And we all just, it was something you did about 2 hours. You had to get into the gear, do the sketch, on to the next one. Which would have Terry Jones eating a cathedral or something like that. So that was all done, yes.
Whose sketch was it?
I don't know. I got a feeling. I really don't know about that. I think it might have been a communal sketch. Right. But anyway, we
and did wardrobe provide you with Alan's wardrobe?
Yes, immaculately sort of copied, well copied. And I do remember that we did it, and of course, again, we were feeling slightly naughty about doing it, because this is a great man, This is one of the great titans of television. We were little jumped-up sort of comedians with a show that nobody watched on a Saturday night. So it was definitely a bit of lèse-majesté there. But when he... So I think, yes, we... I think he wrote to us. Yes, that's right, as he said. And that was wonderful. We loved that. And felt we'd been acknowledged. And we were allowed to be clowns. And made me, of course, realise that Alan had clownish proclivities himself. you know, he saw the humour. But it was touch and go at the time. We thought he might just sue us or something like that.
And of course he did emulate it, didn't he, on the package tour programme that we saw there.
Yes.
As part of that, I think he emulated. He
Yes.
did emulate that sketch
Yes.
with a bit of some editing here. He'd walk by,
Yes.
and then across this way,
Yeah.
and then once more to the other side before popping in at the end and
Yeah.
saying, "Monty who?"
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was obvious how much he loved
No,
that.
he did.
I think there's a couple of things there. One is that when you start being spoofed, then you know you've made it. You know, there is that level of fame you've reached that they don't even have to explain what you do and what you do. I think Stanley Baxter does Alan Whicker going to Glasgow and just getting mercilessly beaten up wherever he goes. You know, and there were people that were doing it, but.
It just means your character is so definite,
yeah,
and so precise in the way it's delivered each time that you can do it. I mean, it's a form of homage in a way.
Of course.
But you don't do it to just anybody. It's got to be someone who has a very strong personality and a strong visual impact.
There's also about that, you talk about the ducking down and the time you had to do it, but I actually think that's charming and that adds to it. All that. But it does hit upon about something about BBC budgets. And
budgets?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, budgets, yes.
When you look on The Tonight Show, when they first started sending Alan, well, hardly across the globe, but across Europe initially, they were still done on a shoestring. I mean, they were, you know, I think he learned how to cut corners on The Tonight Show.
They looked expensive, actually. I think partly because of he himself and his own persona looked very dapper and had a glass of champagne or something like that, was drinking, going on these smart trains. But obviously, you know, that was what gave them a kind of gloss. But no, I bet the budgets were pretty small.
Yeah, I think so. In the play, you talk about the fact that it was the first... They worked out a way to do it so they didn't have to come home to edit, didn't they?
Yes, exactly. The lack of budgets, I think, just brought out the inventiveness of Alan and the team.
Yeah.
And what have we got to work with here? Okay, well, and it led them to greater things. It really brought out that inventiveness, and they came up with these ingenious plans to make everything flow together. So it was an advantage. It spurred them on, you know.
But I say, you know, well, they were all carefully structured and presented, but I suppose something like the Papa Doc interview, I don't know quite how that all happened. The cars just drove into the area where this man was, or it all seemed very, very sort of, you know, handheld, tele verite moment.
Was fly by the seat of their pants. When they arrived, there were rumours that Papa Doc wasn't even still alive. And if he was alive, then maybe Alan soon wouldn't be if he started knocking on Papa Doc's door. And I'd like to pay credit at this point to the great cameraman. We've mentioned Cyril Moorhead, who appears in the play, but also Frank Pocklington in that case, because you see Alan flying by the seat of his pants and being determined to get his man, but then there's Frank, who is following him at every turn, and a lot of the time Alan is inside the car facing this heinous dictator like this, but Frank is filming through the window, surrounded by the Tonton Macoute with their rifles. And over again, it was Alan's instinctive duet with the camera operator, and the way that David used Alan and to push him into situations that nobody had ever attempted before. Not just walking through deep snow on their first meeting, but more especially from dodging bullets and rushing into houses to follow what happens when a house gets raided. And this, so it appeared to be very structured, but the core to Alan was his instinct as a journalist and his pursuit of the story.
I think also Alan made a good point about a situation like that and how you feel, because you're a film crew, that you're somehow invulnerable. And you've got to have that sort of feeling. You made the point very well. We've gone into all sorts of situations like that. Do you panic? No, you think, hey, we're observers. We're not part of all this. You can kill each other. We're going to be observing, and no one is going to, notice us. And I thought that was a very interesting observation. I felt that in certain situations I've been in. Later, people say, how did you deal with that? I said, well, we were filming, Of course we had to keep filming. So you are somehow protected by this aura of being a film crew.
And he would ditch a plan quite late in proceedings if a better story came along. And it was interesting to see the protests against the Jim Crow laws in Louisiana and people bending the knee. That was going to be a story about this epic, the Kentucky Derby. And Alan got there and realised there was a much deeper, more important story happening about race of another kind. And he and his director moved the story around to tell the story of why people were coming out in the streets and bending the knee, why people were being prepared to be taken off to jail because of the apartheid of who could buy where in this nice part of Louisiana. And this film has enormous ramifications and influence. I mean, the contemporary documentary maker Adam Curtis said, I learned the most about showing power and control on documentary television from watching Conflict in Kentucky. That one film, he said, taught me everything.
And talking of dangerous moments, John, didn't you have a story about the Papa Doc?
Oh, yes, indeed, yes. Michael and I were just talking about this just before we came on. We never got to quite finish it, so here it is. Yes, that was, of course, one of the documentaries I watched whilst researching for the part. And next to that, there was this astonishing story about Papa Doc that Alan had learned as part of that documentary. And it takes you into the mind of a dictator and the way they think, and he described it this way. And it was all about Papa Doc himself had been calling an airline to book a particular flight. And he wasn't speaking to an airline executive or a chief executive, anything like that, but just this lad who was in the booking office, who was organising part of the flight for Papa Doc himself. Papa Doc is on the line. And part-way through, Papa Doc says to this young lad, you're doing such a wonderful job here. You're being so professional, so helpful. May I ask to whom I'm speaking? And the lad said, well, Excellency, my name is DuPont. And Papa Doc said, DuPont, why would that name be familiar to me? And the boy paused for a time and said, well, Excellency, my father was Major DuPont, who was part of your presidential guard, who vanished without trace 11 years ago. Oh, right, yes, of course, yes, I remember. Well, and Alan then continued the story, and Papa Doc said, well, I'm very happy you've got a good job with a foreign company and you're doing well, and thank you very much indeed for your help, and put the phone down. And that was an end to it, except the next day, the boy's father turned up back home for the first time in 11 years. So we can only presume that Papa Doc might have said to his henchman, that DuPont fellow, did we shoot him? Oh, no, he's in one of your jails. Release him. And that was something that Alan had discovered as part of that event. But it's extraordinary.
Data with a heart of gold. Stolen gold, probably.
So, Jane, your professional involvement with Alan was mostly on radio, wasn't it?
That's right.
Can you tell us a little about how that came about and what happened there?
Well, I was told a big fat porky lie that Alan had retired from television. He was fed up with it, and that he liked radio. Radio was where he started. He loved to write narrative commentary, and it seemed like a good idea if Alan was available, because he wasn't doing television anymore, which was rubbish, that we could find out together what had happened to some of his most loved or most controversial characters in the intervening years since all his hundreds and hundreds of Whicker's World. So it was a very, very, very simple concept, no budget. Alan was very gracious about that. We worked out a way and had enormous fun finding out what had happened to people and bringing them up and arranging interviews and then updating their stories. And out of that, Alan was getting into his stride, and he said, I've got a counterintuitive idea, Jane. I think you're going to like it. We're going to do the whole history of television on radio. And out of that came It'll Never Last, which I think is one of the very... I think it might have been what Reith said when he heard about this newfangled Wizzo idea of moving pictures. So we did that series together, and then there were ideas for talks, and I could see that Alan wasn't even slowing down. No journalist ever slows down, you know. And the next time I rang up to talk to Alan about his next idea, he was halfway across Italy. He was off doing a major television series for Channel 4. But can I just say, there is a fantastic impersonator in the room, and there was a very poor one, who is my husband, who for a birthday surprise, Mike decided that he would, because I was working with Alan a lot at that time, he would do a spoof birthday presentation in the style of Alan Whicker in the garden. And I got wind of, you won't believe what Mike's up to. I thought, oh, okay. So I mentioned this to Alan Whicker, and a little glint came in Alan's eyes, and he said, let's see if we can trump him, shall we? And he did a wonderful extempore, very gentle put down to Mike, as if he'd just heard the attempt to copy him, and we put the tape recorder in the bird box. So when, after Mike had done his speech, pressed the button, and there was Alan somehow magically in the garden. Mike couldn't see where this great voice was coming from, and I loved him for it. He got a strawberry cheesecake out of me for that. He did like a strawberry cheesecake, did Alan.
Sounds a very marketable device, that. You could put kiddies to sleep with it, you know. We'll have Whicker in the bird nest.
In the bird box.
I mean, you've hit upon something there that a lot of people have said when they're talking about Alan, especially the people that knew him best, and that's charm. He had a great charm. And when I was speaking to John the other day, I was wondering about when you are trying to be him, do you try to embrace that charm yourself and become,
Oh yes, because that's so important, and that's such a huge part of Alan. You want all of the formality in the presentation, but one of the things that drives that and makes it so watchable, so listenable, so engaging, is that charm. And I've watched the Ultimate Package Tour programme about 4 times, just to get that really wonderful sense of conversation and charm. And today we're going to Egypt, then it's up at 4 a.m, we're packing, and then tomorrow it's travelling again. And it's just, it just gives you a glow when you do it.
And the opening tease as well, because at the start of the Ultimate Package, Alan does one of his famous talks to camera.
That's extraordinary, that one, isn't it?
It lasts for 3 minutes, 13 seconds. I've timed every carriage. You think, oh, Alan's going to get on here. He's done very well. Now he's going to get on the train. No, he doesn't. He carries on. Then you think he's going to get on the train here. No, he doesn't. He carries on. 3 minutes, 13 seconds. And of course, because he has to get into the carriage behind the driver. As Valerie would say, he always liked to sit up behind the driver on any trip. But one thing I noticed when I was privileged to come and see the play being recorded was John had the old-fashioned kind of large handheld microphone, and when John was doing Alan extempore, actually saying the words that were said in the original Tonight World Tour, your shoulders went back and you stood there straight as Alan with this handheld camera, and you kind of inhabited microphone, and you inhabited. And it was a goosebump moment for me. Suddenly, you just become Alan for it.
I can imagine that being quite subconscious, actually. You just mirror what you've seen, and there it is, and it comes to us about here.
It's quite interesting to ask you, when did Alan sort of dispense with the hand mic? Because there was period where it was always, see where the way the Pythons did it, you always had the hand mic. But there's certain after that, he must have got rid of it and had a radio mic. Was that a very traumatic moment?
He loved any new toy. I couldn't tell you when it was. Maybe David Green would tell us. But any new toy that came along, Alan wanted to see what it could do. What could I do with this? You know, a clip mic, a boom mic. And he always wanted to play with the technology and somehow incorporate it into his next film.
A hand mic very much conditions how you approach somebody and how you talk to somebody.
Absolutely.
And how you present yourself.
That's
if it's
right.
just a neck mic, you feel looser and freer.
Yes, but with the handheld, if I
Yes.
take the mic away from you, then you automatically stop talking, or not, as the case may be.
Yes.
But the technology always drove the change, didn't it? Not just in Alan's programme, but all programmes. So we know that when cameras started to get smaller, then they were much more life as a team on the move. And then when colour came along, obviously that added another dimension. And I think had Alan continued, he would have embraced the new technology, much as we know now that the David Attenborough, these huge documentaries he's doing, the natural history documentaries, are just enhanced so much by the incredible quality of the pictures. I'm sure Alan would have embraced that, as you say, because he liked all that thing. And he maintained his enthusiasm, it seemed to me, throughout the entire run of the shows. He never seemed to be weary or world weary at all, you know. And he had a delivery which had, I think, a certain sort of energy within it. So even if you look at the Whicker Island sketch, just trying to emulate the way he said it speeds that sketch up as you all change, you know, because it added an energy. And I think it was remarkable. That was it. And it was that kernel that he just loved what he was doing, and he would have gone on doing it.
And it gave the program, every program he did, a rounded feel to it, because by the end you actually, whatever awful things you'd been seeing, by the end you had a kind of left the feeling of a job done well, and that's good, and somehow you feel better for having seen that. And that's partly the charm, partly the energy, but just making sure that he was having the most extraordinarily good time during this episode.
Yeah.
Without sort of putting people down and all that sort of, but he was having a good time, and you will all have a good time watching it.
Really, he had led you through these worlds, and he wanted to teach us about them. And he wasn't concerned, you know, many presenters today, they're more concerned with their own ego and all about them. Alan just wanted to guide us through and show us all these, what was so interesting.
I also think nowadays people are more questioning in some ways about the world and what's going wrong. So you will have quite dark programmes. I mean, Louis Theroux's absolutely brilliant interviewer, mainly because you know he gets some very dark subjects, but you get quite different feel from the end of a Louis Theroux episode than you would have from a Whicker.
Yeah,
you know, you're kind of reflective and sometimes a bit sort of down from some.
But I mean, there was a possibility that Louis Theroux might have been here, mightn't there?
Yes.
Might have been. He might.
He might. What happened?
Oh, sorry. This is not. It's not a historical.
No.
Louis Theroux might have been here years ago.
Maybe I should clarify.
He was due to be here.
He wanted to come, but he was boarding a plane.
No, not enough chairs. Come on. Be honest.
It would have been a juggling act. Yeah.
One of us would have had to go.
It would have been me.
Before we finish, could I just talk, Jane, about the Whicker legacy?
Oh yes.
And what you're involved in and what happened.
Throughout his life, unbeknownst to me or anybody else other than, I believe, Valerie and his accountant and his very close friend David Crosland, Alan was accruing a bequest, a legacy fund, which I didn't know about until after he died, for the promulgation of curiosity and professionalism in documentary broadcast journalism. And there was a footnote of, you know, various people should be involved, and my name came up, and I was absolutely thrilled to be asked, because Alan knew long before I did that the model that enabled him to have a good idea and just go off and do it fully funded for a broadcaster was now broken. And it was very, very difficult, if you were an unknown, to get anybody to take you seriously enough to fund you to create a documentary of your dreams. And if, as I believe Alan did, and certainly the Whickers believe, documentary is that important. You know, for an engaged free society, I think you need to have documentary, good quality documentary. And so Alan left this extraordinary fund, and we have been handing out significant sums of money to first-time documentary makers who woo us, blow our socks off with a proposal that would take us into a hitherto unknown or unseen world. And those worlds, we have funded programs that are, it might be in the Hazari community in Afghanistan, or it could be the world inside a remarkable young man's head who's been told he has a brain tumour, and he's coming to terms with that inner world of his own. We have been able to finance first-time documentary makers in places where, due to the economics or the politics of the area, they would never otherwise get a chance. And these documentaries are being picked up by HBO, Netflix, the BBC. Early this autumn is going to be showing one of our funded documentaries, The Hermit of Treeg, about a guy who self-isolates in the Western Highlands for 37 years. We have been able to empower documentary makers from Thailand to Myanmar to Bournemouth and beyond, and it's been a joy, not just in film and TV, but also in audio, because that was significant for Alan.
So, which means the spirit of Alan Whicker has lived on, even in the streaming services today, and I think that does get a round of applause. Yeah. We've got one more clip reel we're going to finish off with, but before that, I'd like to say thank you so much to our panel. You've done a great job. John Coleshaw, Jane Ray and Michael Pony, thank you so much.
And I would like to say a thank you too. I believe this is an order. It will mean a journey to the piano. I'm not going to sing, don't panic. But I have to retrieve something. Valerie has been popping up and down, handing out some very splendid awards, along with fat wads of cash, up to £100,000. It struck us at the Whickers that the one person who never got one of these awards was Valerie. So we have made one specially, which don't worry, Valerie, you're not even allowed to stand up and either run out of the room or collect it. But I hope you brought your big handbag tonight, because you're going to be taking this home. And this is for you.
Take a picture of it.
Says to Alan Whicker and Valerie Cleland for a lifetime of inspiration and support. Seriously, there are many young people around the world who couldn't have done it without you. And we have to thank you now. Thank you.
As I say, thank you to a fantastic panel, and we'll get off stage and run the last clip reel for you. Thank you so much for coming.
I'm waiting for a train, and what's more, I'm going to stop it. At least I think I'm going to stop it. This is the... there it is! This is right on time too. This is the Alaska Railroad, one of the most friendly railroads in the world and one of the most unusual, because it's run for the benefit of its passengers. And this is a pretty unusual idea, an old-fashioned idea, especially in Britain, where anyone who takes your fares is doing you a favour, it seems. But here I'm told, oh, there goes an aeroplane too. Here I'm told the train will stop for anyone who wants to stop it, who will raise a hand. Well, let's see if it works. Now, how do you stop a train? Do you get in the line? No, perhaps you don't. Who wants to be like Pearl White, anyway? Face the driver, raise your hand, you'll find that he will understand.
That was Billy Brown of London Town. I'm told that it will stop anywhere. Now, will it stop or won't it? Is it going to stop? No, I don't think it is. Don't tell me they told me wrong. No? Yes! Oh, yes!
Down here, go over.
Can you imagine doing that on the 853 into Victoria? How about world events and that sort of thing? Do you keep yourselves informed of what's happening?
Not very much, no. As a Swiss wife, we don't have the vote in Switzerland. I don't really have very many opinions about it.
Let's go a little fast again.
All right.
There's something about a speedboat that makes you want to laugh.
You can. Alan, how's your drink?
He does flirt a little, your husband.
Yes. Yes, and I like to sort of be there to keep an eye on what's going on.
Why do you believe that the Baron loves you?
Well, first of all, he stayed married to me for 7 years nearly. And secondly, he told me so, and he said that he loved me because I was very ordinary, which I interpreted to mean that I wasn't neurotic. And so we agreed, and it suits us both.
I would say a dominant characteristic was the lack of tenderness, the lack of consideration, the lack of sort of sensitivity. And the New Zealand male is very much characterised by the All Black. You may have heard of the great New Zealand All Black, who's normally hefty, aggressive, and sexually probably one of these great brute force males who probably wouldn't have any idea about a New Zealand woman's body, probably would have never heard of a clitoris. And
these hushed and holy ladies may live with disciplined thoughts and downcast eyes, but they certainly know how to loosen up. Just 4 times a week, the Mother Abbess permits 40 minutes of do-as-you-please recreation.
Well, try again.
I'm not as good at this as you are. But what made you choose a silent order, Sister Gertrude?
Oh, it was the prayer line. I wanted yes, because I never stopped talking, do I? Oh, I love to talk. I love to talk.
Universal. You don't need to go to Tibet or 1,000 miles up the Amazon. You find it everywhere. This is Dorset and the Cerne Abbas giant, 180 feet tall and reasonably erect. Many of us seek wonders or reassurance from the giants and gods we create in our minds or upon some green hillside, hoping to propitiate the spirits and defeat evil, or make tolerable death's harsh reality. And those who aid us in such flights of fancy into the unknown are not all mad or dishonest or insincere. Indeed, anyone with an aptitude for extrasensory perception may be capable of apprehending things beyond normal limits of space and time. It must be a great comfort to have diamonds by the dozen, I suppose.
Comfort against what? For what?
The cold, perhaps?
Yes, they have to be useful for something. Don't tell me you've run out of questions.
Never, but
No?
I'm enjoying this so much.
Yes? Good.